Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today is April 23rd. We are continuing with the Sigil Precept series. We are going to be talking about the Crone Sage aspect. In your book, it's going to be pages 50 to 53, and your workbook is going to be pages 90 to 93. So what exactly is the Crone Sage? And why do we use those terms? The Crone Sage is a time of life where we've gotten older. We are considered elderly, but we are, in our today's society anyway, we're considered the seniors. Which, in some aspects, in society, it can be, looked at as a negative. I try not to look at the Crone Sage as a negative. I try to look at it as we have a human being that has experienced a lot. So they are a walking, breathing, living example of history. They are our elders. They are our wise ones. And that's what the Crone Sage is for me. A crone is an elderly woman, a wizened woman, and the sage is the wise man. Everything that the crone and sage, all the wisdom they have gained through their experiences, the power of age and time has shaped them. Lessons that they've learned, what they can teach the next generation, and the next, and the next. The retribution in many areas of their lives that they've gone through, the intuition they've gained, and how they use that intuition, the full transformation of that cycle of going from, maiden warrior to mother king, now they're sage and crone. And to see that's a full-blown circle. And I absolutely love the idea of honoring our crones and our sages. And sadly, in some aspects of society, we don't. But that's kind of coming around to how we learn, how we grow, what we've learned from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our aunts, our uncles. These are all Crone Sage. Now, in some belief systems, you have to be a certain age to reach the Crone Sage. And yes, in a sense, you kind of do. But let me ask, when you're speaking to a friend or a family member that's going through something and you drop wisdom on them, you're tapping into your Crone Sage. You're helping them through. It's not just about the mother king by nurturing them, but it's giving that wisdom, that sense of help, that sense of, this is what I've learned. So you're actually tapping into that Crone Sage aspect at that given time, even though you've not reached that physical age. It's these little nuances that we sometimes forget to look at or forget to honor in our daily lives. But having that Crone Sage, having that wisdom at any age, and passing that on is honoring that Crone Sage aspect. So now me, as a minister, I have been humbly honored in many respects. When the Crone Sage has come, I've been blessed that I was able to see my grandparents, interact with them, and I have been blessed and honored to perform funerals and last rites for many of our ancestors. The men and women who've lived long lives, filled with so many lessons. And then I'm honored on very rare occasions to visit these wonderful, men and women before they passed. As a hospice nurse years ago, um, the lessons that I learned from sitting and talking to these wonderful crones and sages was so humbling. Helping them through whatever it was they were going through, listening to their stories, listening to their wisdom, really seeing the joy in their eyes, and I remember sitting and speaking to this gentleman that was one of my clients. His name was Ralph. He lived in the same house that he grew up in. His parents started. It was on a farm. He was 78 years old. This family farm had been in his family for 2 generations. So his great-grandparents, his grandparents, his parents, and then himself, so actually probably more than that, but his great-grandparents started it. And it started out very, very small. And he and I would sit and we'd talk. His wife had passed like 15 years prior, and him and I would sit for hours, and he'd tell me about the stories of the land and show me these beautiful pictures, all in black and white, and how this little itty bitty house started with his grandparents, how they scraped together this money to get this small plot of land, and to work it and to farm it. And he'd flip and he'd show his grandparents, how his grandparents added on to the home, and how the grandparents added on to the land, but they still farmed it. And looking at the old farm implements and looking at these men and women. And it wasn't just the men that were out farming, it was their wives, their children. And he had pictures. His parents out there under the heat of the sun, adding to the house and the land. And by the time it got to his parents, from his great-grandparents to his parents, the house had gone from basically a small little cabin with 1 bedroom to a farmhouse that had a 2nd story and had a kitchen and running water and a bathroom, and they had kept the original house, and they turned that into like more of a sitting area for company, turned into this little cute cabin, redone it. So it was still original from that land, but they just built up and over, and you could walk through this one door and go right into the original, and it was just amazing. And all the angles and little things that you see in this house, and all the updates and whatnot. And he would, if he was feeling well that day, he would go out with me and we'd sit on the porch, and it was a wraparound porch, and he'd tell me how he as a boy used to do this, and climb this tree, or help his dad with this, or walk down the road to this little creek and fish. And how when he and his wife got married, it was, this house was passed on to him and his wife, as he was the only boy in a family of 7. And how he worked that land, and how he actually he had 50 acres of land to work. He had a total of 55 acres, so he had 5 acres. That was his land. That was grass. That was his house. He's like, this is where I wanted my family to be. We don't work the 5 acres where my house sits, but all around him, the 50 acres was all around him. He's like, we worked it day after day, year after year, my children and I. And him and his wife had 11 children. He had 5 boys. Um, and he'd sit there and he'd regale me with these stories um, of how this land meant so much and what him and his family has gone through, what his parents went through, what his grandparents went through, what his great-grandparents went through, how the land, how everything has changed. And listening to this, I was transported back in time and space, and I was able to see from his perspective, to get a close-up view of what it was like to live, to breathe, to exist, to thrive during all this. And it made me appreciate the time that I had. Now, at the time, my age was actually, I was about 27 at the time. So I hadn't really lived a very long life. But to see this man and take so much pride in his home, in his land, in himself even at his age, even with his dire illness, just listening to him was phenomenal. And I remember just going in and saying, I really enjoy listening to him, listening to his stories, seeing his pictures, walking around his home, looking at all the memories he made. And I remember sitting one time on the porch, we were drinking tea, and Ralph always dressed in a pair of overalls, jeans overalls, a t-shirt, and a flannel. And he had work boots. And we were sitting drinking tea on the porch. It was a beautiful summer morning, and I was there at 7 a.m. and by the time we went out to the porch, it was like 10, 11. Just before his lunchtime, and I would spend anywhere between 8 and 10 hours with him a day until his daughter or one of his sons would come. And we're sitting there, and we're looking out over the property, and we're looking down. He had a longer driveway, and we're looking at this, this road. It's now paved, and it's 2-lane, and across that road is another house, and more property. And I remember him sitting there and just being really quiet. And I said, Mr. Ralph, what's going on? You're so quiet this morning, usually real talkative. He goes, he's like, just sitting here looking at this. He's like, I've got my property. It's like around me. He's like, and I'll always have this 55 acres. I said, yeah. He goes, you know that house across the street? I said, yeah. He goes, I remember when that house was built. I remember when that family sold the original house that was there. He's like, it was a 1-room cabin. He says, and I remember when that 1-room cabin was taken down and that house was built. He's like, I remember all of that so vividly. I'm like, were you friends with him? He goes, oh yeah. He's like, around these parts we have to be. He's like, we're the type of people that will help if asked, but we leave you alone otherwise. He's like, and that's the way neighbors should be. I said, okay. He's like, I remember sitting here though, and I remember seeing that. He's like, do you see that barn that's behind there? I said, yeah. He goes, do you know that's the 3rd barn? I said, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, those silos were never there. He said, those silos were built in the 80s. I'm like, wow. So they're pretty new. Because mind you, I'm in my 20s and it's in the 90s by then, 2000s. And he goes, yeah. He's like, less than 30 years old. He's like, that family works every morning. He's like, you see that garden on the side of that house? I said, yeah. He goes, I see the wife and the daughters go out there every morning working. It's like they're homesteading. He's like, this land is so rich in the history. It's like in every time that house has been changed, do you know that garden has always been there? That same exact garden, the same exact size. That garden nourishes that family. I'm like, wow, that's a huge piece of history. He goes, mm-hmm. He's like, and when I pass, he says, my son is going to inherit this house, my eldest. I said, okay. He's going to work the land. He's going to sit here on this porch. He's going to have stories to tell, and he's going to watch as I'm sure this house will be added on to, and that house will be added on to, and the road may be widened or changed, or the sunsets and the sunrises and memories will be made. I said, yeah, I'm sure. He says, and then this house eventually will no longer be here. And I said, well, why do you think that? He goes, well, he's like, the way I have it set up, my eldest son gets it when I pass away. He's like, and as it stands, there's enough room for my eldest and his wife and 2 children, and my youngest, his wife and his 1 child will probably share this house. I said, okay. He's like, my eldest has a boy. My youngest doesn't. I said, okay. He says, eventually I'll be forgotten and this will move on to something else. And I looked at him and I said, well, that's a sad thing. He goes, no, it's not. That's a cycle of life. It's like, you're here, you have memories, you make memories, you watch the world go by, you live, you thrive, you pass away, your legacy goes on to the next. He says, but eventually your legacy is gone. Whatever wisdom I share here and now with you and my grandchildren and my children, my great-grandchildren, eventually it'll be lost to time. I just looked at him and I went, the amount of things that you, in just your generation, went through, what you survived, how you thrived. I said, you have such an inner strength that I'm never going to be able to come close to, Mr. Ralph. I said, it's amazing. I said, it's humbling. It's, just sitting here and listening to you. Just one of your stories of how you lived and how you thrived and how you strived, what you sacrificed and how your retributions were. He goes, yeah. He's like, stories survive, people don't. He's like, and sometimes those stories don't survive either. He's like, and this is why, as I get older, he's like, sometimes I get afraid. And I said, you, Mr. Ralph? He goes, oh, yes. Oh, yes, even me. He's like, I'm ready. He's like, it's not that I'm not. He's like, I've lived a very full life. I've lived a hard life. And I looked at him and seen him, and he was a bigger man. He was about 6'6", 200 and some pounds, graying hair, massive man, calloused hands, weathered skin. He had laugh lines, but he had such wonderful, wonderful softness to him too. He's like, it's kind of scary. He's like, my life is about done. He's like, I'm come to the stage in my life that's about done. He's like, I'm not afraid. Not really about passing. I said, well, what's so scary about it then? He goes, being forgotten. He's like, I'm lucky. He's like, most people, like my parents, he's like, they lived here until I became of age, when I took over the property because my father couldn't do it anymore. It's like, they moved out of state. They moved to Florida. After a while, they moved back here. They stayed with my wife and I for about 2 years. He's like, and it got to the point where I had to make a decision. My wife and I had to make a decision. He's like, within 3 years, my mom passed away while they lived here. My wife and I took care of my mom and my dad. 3 years, and my mom passed away. I said, okay. I said, I'm sorry. He's like, my father had severe dementia and Alzheimer's. It's like, and with me working the property, my wife working, and there wasn't a lot. It's like, sadly, I had to put my father in a home. It's like, I'd visit my father 3 times a week. It's like, but my father died in that home. He's like, to know that my father did not pass away here and not even knew that he didn't pass away here. He's like, that's scary. He's like, because he forgot. My father forgot with his dementia and Alzheimer's. My father forgot who he was. It's like, I'm lucky. She's like, I haven't forgotten yet. I may die on this property. It's like, but that house across the street, it's like, I remember the original owners were taken away. They were put in homes. He's like, they could remember everything, but they became too feeble. They couldn't get up and down the stairs. They couldn't take care of themselves. It's like, they were put in a home and they were forgotten. Their histories were forgotten. And the house was sold to somebody else. So all of that legacy is gone, he says. I said, well, Mr. Ralph, you're a lucky one. He goes, yeah, I am. I said, and the good thing is even though, you only have 2 sons and that one son only has a son, I said, there's a good possibility that more sons can be had. More males can be had. So your legacy continues. He goes, yeah. He's like, but times are changing. Like, not a lot of people want to farm anymore. It's hard work. It's expensive. He's like, he's like, I'm an old, feeble man now. And my time is almost up. He's like, I've had my fallibility told to me many a time, shoved down my throat. He's like, sometimes watching all of these people that leave because they're old, they're feeble, their mental health is wrong, they can't remember, they can't do. He's like, so many people rip our individuality out from underneath of us. They forget that we're the storytellers. They forget what we went through. They forget. It's like, you, young lady, are a rare one. For someone your age to want to sit and listen to an old man rant and rave and tell and regale, and he's like, you're a rare one. And I said, well, that's because you have wisdom to share. He's like, yes, but not many people your age and younger care. And he just got quiet again. And I have to admit, over the years, I have seen honor, integrity, wisdom, respect given to the elderly in many forms. But I've also seen the other side where the fallibility of the elderly is literally shoved down their throats and jumped up upon and crammed in there to remind them that they're old and feeble. I've seen both sides. We do not want to admit that we are mortal. We don't like the idea of being mortal. That we are on the downside of life, headed towards the acceptance of quantity of the life that we've lived. We're no longer caring for a brief moment about the quality of life. We're just looking at the quantity left. We don't want to be reminded that eventually we're going to be that way. I'm going to share with you another story. A wonderful lady, and she was a Southern woman, and she was 87 years old. And when I was a nurse, I took care of her. And she was a talker. Oh, she was a talker. And I was her nurse for the last 3 months of her life. She was an amazing woman. Gosh, she was so amazing. She was a Southern lady, and I mean that in the best amount. And she had a Southern drawl, and she was such a breath of fresh air. 87 years old, and she was feisty, and she would watch infomercials. And she would watch these things all day, every day. It wasn't that she was buying anything. She would just be like, that's so silly. And every morning that I would come in, she would regale me with these stories. The pinches and tucks and the removals and the surgeries that make you skinny as a pin and making themselves new and improved. And it's just like, oh, Miss Amy, why? Why are they making themselves pretty and taking away the job for another? She's like, I don't understand. And she's like, I don't really care what people think of me. She's like, I'm round, I'm happy, and my opinion matters. And her name was Miss Ellie. And she'd tell me every morning, she'd just come through with this feistiness. Miss Amy, let me tell you about what I seen last night. And I'm like, oh, Miss Ellie, what did you see? She's like, oh, I don't care what people think of me. She's like, I have rolls. She's like, I have curves. She's like, I have scars. And she's like, and my body tells me the story of my life. She's like, and nobody has taken that away from me. I'm like, okay, Miss Ellie, I don't understand. I get it, Miss Ellie. You don't have to do that. I learned a lot from her. And one of the things that I learned from her is it's a choice that we redo and upgrade. Every part of us, we try to stop aging in some way. We put creams and lotions, and we pin and we tuck, and we do all these things to try and make us young, keep our youth. We do all these things. We spend so much money on keeping our youth. But I'm going to ask you a question. Do we really stop the aging, or do we just pretty up the package at the end and we take away the job for another? The way our society looks at aging can sometimes be interesting and other times can be pretty appalling. In many countries and cultures, our elderly stay with us. We care and nurture them as they did for us. But much of the time in our society, we shuffle our elderly into homes with other elderly, and then we get busy in our lives and we forget, and we don't take the time to ask about their lives or just sit and listen, to our history, to the ones that have lived through it. And in no time, our wheel turns, and we find ourselves in the same place, wanting just to see our family, to share our stories, to share our memories. And the men and women that were in many of the homes that I worked in were filled with stories of how they lived, of lessons and learned and thoughts and hopes and dreams still shone with vibrancy, and to listen to them, for them to go, oh, you're a younger person. You're sitting actually listening to me. You want to know, you want to hear. It shocked them sometimes because their own families couldn't even do that. And then I met some that their families were there all the time with them. The only reason I was there is if they had, some sort of medical health issue. But I remember a couple of families. Now, mind you, as a hospice nurse, I worked odd hours. And because even though I was married, I had no children. So a lot of the people that I worked with, they were married and had children. So a lot of the times I would work on a holiday because I wanted them to be able to spend time. So I would work on a holiday, but my hours, sometimes I would work 24 hours, sometimes 48. Sometimes I'd work 3 days on, 2 days off, depending. And sometimes I was working, at the time I was living in Coleman, Michigan. Sometimes I was working in Gladwin, Clare, Mount Pleasant, you name it, I was working wherever they needed me. But I remember one Thanksgiving, and this family was really close. The daughter and her husband and her one child lived with the mom. The mom owned the home, and she was elderly, so they had set up a room downstairs that used to be one of their secondary living rooms to the mom's room, so the mom wouldn't have to go up and downstairs and stuff. And they moved in. Her and her husband and her son moved in. I was there because the mom was a diabetic. She had just had her breast removed from cancer, and she had a bad hip. So I was there to help with a lot of that. So I was there, and I got a call from dispatch the night before Thanksgiving. They're like, can you take Thanksgiving Day? I said, sure, no problem. What time do I need to be there? How long? What's my schedule? And what is it the family would like me to do? So I go there. It was in Gladwin. And beautiful home, beautiful family. And I get there at 7 in the morning. I help Miss Margaret, was her name, Margaret. I helped Miss Margaret get ready, and her daughter's name was Alice. And Alice and I helped Miss Margaret get ready for the day. Gave her bath and dressed and hair done and makeup done, and because it's Thanksgiving. We put her in her chair, and we wheel her out to the kitchen because she wants to be a part of everything. And I'm like, okay, what else can I help you with? And I did some house cleaning and stuff to help the family prepare. I helped to set the table, and because they were having, the whole entire family was coming. And mind you, this is a big farmhouse, and the table sat 12. Just the big table alone, and we set up 2 smaller ones for the kids. And I helped prep, and I helped cook, all the while listening to stories. And as people milled in, they had a big old honking, lovely country kitchen with an island in the center, and it was a big old kitchen, and it had been a big old kitchen for years. And then they had a secondary prep kitchen because Miss Margaret used to bake cakes. So we had about probably 12, 13 people between the 2 areas, myself included, all chit-chatting. And it was not just the women, it was the men too. And we were cooking, and we were talking, and we were laughing, and just, I was a part of this family, listening to the stories and listening to Miss Margaret, telling, this is my recipe, I know what I'm doing, and the joking and the laughing, and, well, you need to do this is the secret recipe, and this is what you do, and and yes, Mom, okay, Grandma, okay, kind of thing. And listening to this family, being a part of this, even though I'm not related, I felt welcome. When the time came, I made sure everything was on the table with them. I said, well, tell you what, and I sat Miss Margaret in her spot at the table. And I said, I'm going to go into the kitchen. I'm going to start cleaning up some stuff for you guys. I said, you guys enjoy your meal. And because, again, this is respect. This is a family. And I'm not blood. I want to respect the Thanksgiving for the family. And Miss Margaret, she turns to me in her chair, and all eyes, I swear, after she turned, all eyes were on me. And Miss Margaret goes, and where do you think you're going? I said, well, Miss Margaret, I'm going to go into the kitchen. I'm going to start cleaning up a little bit and prepping everything for the cleanup after the dinner. So there's less to do. I said, it'll be fine. You guys sit here. I'll be here because I don't leave until 8. And it's only like 3 o'clock. I said, I'll take care of a few things. It's fine. She goes, no, no. And I swear everybody else was like looking at me and I could feel daggers. And I'm like, why? She goes, my dear, it doesn't matter if you're family or not. You're sitting at this table and you're having dinner with us. You have no one else to go home to other than your husband. You've worked. You've put food on this table. You are a part of the reason we're thankful. And the rest of the family went, exactly. And I went, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to be disrespectful because this is family time. And they went, it doesn't matter if you are blood. It doesn't matter if you are married into this family. She goes, do you want to know what family is? Do you want to know what being a part of the family is? I said, no, Miss Margaret, can you tell me? She goes, appreciation, respect. Those are the 2 main ingredients of what being a family is. She's, you helped us. You've been helping us. You're not going to go off and work while we're sitting here eating. You helped prepare this. You're going to sit and enjoy this with us. You are a part of our family. And my heart just went, it was amazing. So, sitting through that dinner, listening to the stories and seeing that family and hearing the bantering and everything and all the good news and all the memories, it was just overwhelming. It warmed my heart. And it was about a month after that Thanksgiving. Wasn't even Christmas yet. Actually, probably a couple weeks. Thinking about it, wasn't even Christmas. Wasn't even close to Christmas. A couple weeks after, Miss Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. In the middle of the night. And I remember when I got that call, I cried. I cried because I had just seen her the day before, and I was coming back that morning at 7, and she had passed away, and I got the phone call from the night nurse. She's like, you don't have to come in or anything. And I said, well, I want to. So I went in at 7, and I helped. The night nurse had stayed, and we had already prepped everything, and all the family was there. And they stayed out of her room, but they sat in the kitchen. They sat in the other entryway of the other living room. All these family members sharing stories while we were waiting for the funeral home to get there. Sharing all the stories and the love and the laughter that she had given them. They took the time to honor her, and not just her husband. So they honored her as a crone, and they honored her husband as the sage. It was so vitally important at that time for them to, honor this woman and her husband and the heritage and the memories and, the foundation. So he was never left out. They honored the crone and the sage. They honored those two that came together that made this family. And it's amazing because the crones and the sages, they hold the keys to our past. Our foundations are built upon them. Our histories are built upon them. And sometimes, just sometimes, taking a few moments and spending some time with them to listen and to learn from them, to simply honor them. It's literally walking, living, breathing history. It's wisdom. That's all it is. It's amazing. So, as I had said earlier, whether we hit a certain age or not, we can still impart wisdom as a crone and a sage within ourselves. Besides the obvious visiting our elders, of course, and learning what they went through, that also honors our crone and our own sage, our own. It's cultivating patience. One thing that I've learned about crones and sages is they have infinite patience. You can look and see what a crone or a sage does. What makes them, what they are. How have they attained the wisdom? How do they share it? Remembering that the crone and sage is now a family counselor. They're a writer. They're a keeper of the family history. Once they're gone, our history is gone. If you don't listen and sit and write it down, our history is gone. The female aspect is the crone. She has gone through menopause. And majority of the time she came out with her sanity intact. She's turned all of her energies that she put out there as maiden, as mother, she's turned that inwards. And she takes life slower, more mellow. Okay? The sage is the male aspect. He's gone through his own sense of menopause, and he now passes his familiar responsibilities to a younger male, while he, the sage, counsels the family, as well, and he's turned all of his energies to the inside. He's taking life slower. He's enjoying a slower pace while still being there, guiding. That is what the crone and sage do. They are our counselors. They are our guides. So I want you guys to take a few minutes. Think about your grandparents. Think about your parents or any elder that you know. How do they live their life right now? What do they do within their day? Can you copy that at all? Can you walk a mile in their shoes? How did they live their life when they were younger? Can you keep up? Keep in mind the way they lived as a younger person actually made them who they are today. So can you walk a mile in their shoes? Let me give you guys an idea. My husband, okay, he's 21 years older than me. And love the man to death. He is amazing. He forward thinks. He's everything. We've been together over 30 years. Okay. And I remember going to his family property, his parents' property. Okay. And we had just gotten married, and he'd always lived in the UP, always on Samsel Hill. And he never really looked at the UP as a tourist. He was actually seeing the UP through my eyes. Okay. It's like the first time I ever went to the UP. And I'm just like, I'm enthralled. I still am to this day. I love it there. So we decided to go visit the family property. And now, mind you, the property my husband grew up on, there was a house at the time there, but it had been since tore down. And his uncle had like a camper on there. His grandma's house was still there. The original house was way back further. And then down the road, his dad had built a house, and I swear it was a dollhouse. I literally walked in and I had to bend over because his grandparents were very, very short. He's actually sat in the back of a Model T with that little rumble seat, and all you could see was the top of their heads. They were very small people, very compact. And I remember seeing that house, and I remember Don telling me as we're walking through this, the cupboards were hand built by his dad. These folks had raised their children in this house. That Don had gone down to that house and had worked the yard and had worked in the house. And now, mind you, I'm like 5'8", 5'9", and I'm bent over, literally. Don is probably 5'4", 5'5", 5'6"-ish. He had to bend over a little bit. I walked up the stairs and there was like a room on either side. I had remember walking up these stairs and he's like, yeah, girls are on this side, boys are on this side. And I literally was like bent. And the memories that Don shared. And then going back to the property where he grew up and really looking at it and going, yeah, my grandparents' house was way down there when they first did it. And now it got moved up here. And this is, this is where I used to play. This is what we used to go down. And so I learned a little bit about my husband from his memories, from his sage time. And I remember asking him at that time, I said, what is it you learned from your grandparents? He's like, I learned a lot. He's like, do you know that my grandma was 98 years old? 98. She lived in this house. Do you know that she would walk 1.5 miles every day to town? At 98 years old. They finally had to put her in a home because, she was just getting to that point. It's like, my family grew up on this property. My family worked this property with hand tools and horses. And they literally, and believe me, folks, when I tell you McMillan is small, I'm telling you it's a flashing yellow light small, okay? You blink, you miss it, okay? I'm serious. It was a logging is what it used to be. And his dad used to log. A lot of the folks up there used to log. And he's like, yeah, my family worked this property. We had next to nothing, but we literally survived by living off the land. Chickens, goats, horses, cows, pigs, you name it. He's like, we would go off and forage. And my husband's eldest daughter, Danielle, had come to visit. And we took her up there to show her family property. And he, again, shared his stories and stuff with her. And I remember her looking at him just in awe about, this family property. And sharing his stories, sharing his memories, at that moment, he was the sage sharing it with the mother. The next generation. She has since shared this with her children, and I'm hoping her children will share it with the next. So, passing that on. And I remember telling Don, there's no way, because my grandparents were the same. My grandparents literally had a farm and stuff. I do farming, I do homesteading in some respects, but I don't do half of what I used to when I was younger. I grew up in that. Gardens and foraging, canning, preserving. I grew up being taught all of that. I can go out in any season and find food. That was taught to me as a child. I know how to can. I know how to dehydrate. I know how to forage. But I don't do that as much anymore. As an adult, I just don't. And when I was younger, I literally was blown away at my grandparents, at my aunts and uncles, literally doing all of this every single day in order to eat, in order to feed their family. And my family was not small. They didn't have 2 or 3 kids. It was like 5, 6, 10, 12. I have 2 aunts. One had 21, one had 22 kids. And they both had farms. Okay, so believe me. But to watch them. And then I think back, wow. When I was younger, I walked only a small portion in their shoes. I literally cannot even do it nowadays. I can't. I have the knowledge. And I can if I wanted to. But to walk in their shoes, there's no way. There's no way. To be hungry and to look for food. So yeah. So what is it that during this time the Crone and Sage go through? Well, their body changes. Their energies are more focused on spiritual activities. It marks the time when their physical growth has slowed down and the cells are not replaced as quickly. Their physical bodies are beginning to separate from their spiritual bodies. It's because of their lives, which were rough and downright tough, they have gained the wisdom and knowledge brought through these changes. And that is the time that one can be called the crone and the sage. So yeah. So the three aspects, no matter what point you are within the wheel of your life, is held within each of us. We can be maiden warrior looking hopeful to the future. We can be mother king holding down a job, a home, taking care of and nurturing our children and others. And we are a crone sage, sitting silently as we reminisce about the joys we found amongst the hardships we lived through, sharing our story with the next generation. So, that's exactly what it is. We are, in essence, doing all of this on a daily. We're living, turning our personal wheels to each aspect. If you go to your workbook, some of the things we're going to discuss in our workbook, pages 90 to 93. Our discussions are going to be looking at one's future as a man and a woman. How do you wish to be celebrated? Next question. How do the crones and sages in your life right now share their wisdom presently? How do they live their lives now? What do they do within their day? What stands out most to you, and can you copy any of that? What do you want to accomplish when you are in the crone sage aspect? How do you want to be remembered? What do you want to happen to you? And what do you want to happen for you? And how are you going to be? So I want you to think about that. Because as we enter that whole crone sage aspect, you know, we are always a wheel spinning, always. Sometimes we go back and enjoy our maiden warrior. Sometimes we're that mother crone. Sometimes, you know, we spin around. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to work on the goals that you've placed on your worksheets. I want you to look over and make notes in your journal about the discussions that we had done today. I want you to go out and I want you to try and visit the crones and sages in your life. I want you to take a look at what was discussed during this workshop, and I want you to journal your thoughts on that. Okay? Another thing I would like you to do is I want you to purchase a small item, or find a small item, whatever it may be. Something that celebrates the crone sage aspect of you. I want you to see it clearly every day and use it as a reminder to honor that within you. And then at the end of that, before our next class, which will be May 7th, in the next 2 weeks, for 2 weeks, I want you to really focus on that crone sage aspect. And at the end, I want you to journal your result. Remember what I said. The crone and sage is all about gaining wisdom through experiences, the power of age and time. Using your intuition and the full transformation. Come May 7th, we're going to talk about self. And that will be the end of this level. So, come back May 7th. But honor the crone and sage in your lives right now. Honor who you are going to become if you're not already there. Just because it comes at a certain age doesn't necessarily mean, at a physical age, doesn't necessarily mean you cannot honor that aspect now. You can. Every single day. The crones and sages that came before you, your foundations, your history, honor it. So, as always, you have a wonderful 2 weeks. We'll be back on May 7th for the aspect of self in this cycle of life. You are, as always, wanted, needed, loved, cherished. You are amazing. You are phenomenal. You make every single day brighter and better. May you have a wonderfully blessed day, and thank you for joining us today. And may you have a wonderful 2 weeks. Many blessings. Bye-bye.